and allow me to also extend my sincere congratulations to the government of Uganda for successfully hosting the 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit, as well as the 3rd South Summit, which of course will open tomorrow. I wish them every success in chairing these two important groups, whose rich and diverse character from the Global South is so critical to the UN system and to multilateralism as a whole, as NAM represents 55% of the global population, and the Group of 77 in China is the largest negotiating bloc of developing countries in the United Nations system. And I must say that I'm very proud that it was on these two occasions that I'm undertaking my very first official visit to Africa as President of the United Nations General Assembly for its 78th session. Yesterday morning, we opened the 19th Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement, held under the theme Deepening Cooperation for Shared Global Affluence, which concluded this afternoon. And tomorrow morning, we will attend the 3rd South Summit organized by the Group of 77 in China under the banner Leaving No One Behind. In my address to the openings of both forums, I used the occasion to reiterate my appreciation for both organizations, whose support to my presidency has proven immensely useful during very challenging times. The current climate, and I mean this politically and literally, the current global climate is marked by profound instability, and our multilateral system is on trial. High-level gatherings like these are an occasion for leaders of the Global South to demonstrate that cooperation and collaboration are not only still possible, but are in fact indispensable. They constitute the sole credible course of action to authentically and meaningfully address the depth and breadth of the challenges we face. Indeed, it is only a cohesive international community that we stand a chance through a cohesive international community that we stand a chance of succeeding. In a time of unprecedented crisis, far too often the voices of the Global South and of developing countries are relegated to the margins and peripheries. This is not acceptable, either politically or morally. In fact, I am absolutely convinced that both the Non-Aligned Movement and the Group of 77 in China are key drivers and influencers of peace, progress, prosperity, and sustainability, all of which are priorities of my presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening, on the occasion of his newfound chairmanship of both groups, I will have the honor of paying a courtesy call on His Excellency Mr. Yoweri Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda. I was also very privileged to meet with the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, the UN country team, and the resident coordinator for Uganda, as well as other bilateral engagements. In all my meetings, I addressed a range of pressing global issues, including climate change, sustainable development, peace and security, and of course, human rights. I also made sure to communicate the work ongoing in New York, including invitations to upcoming events such as the Summit of the Future and my presidency's signature event, Sustainability Week, in April. Today, I also undertook several field visits around the capital city of Kampala. In fact, I'm just back from said visits. In terms of migration, my visits included UN-operated programs such as the UNHCR's Urban Response Initiative in Naisamba and IOM's Kampala Transit Center in Nakasero. Regarding education, I visited Nakivubo Blue Primary School and their Girls Empowering Girls program, which they run with UNICEF. I also had the chance to visit Macquarie University, where I was introduced to Macquarie's University Multidisciplinary Innovation Pod, conducting research on digital innovation and urbanization in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme. Finally, on women's and girls' rights, I was welcomed into the offices of the Saudi Help Lines Center, where I saw the incredible work to counter gender-based violence, child labor, neglect, and abuse. It was a truly eye-opening experience and a privilege I do not take for granted to have had the chance to witness firsthand the work being spearheaded in Uganda by the various entities under the United Nations umbrella. I am very proud of that work. To complement these extensive visits tomorrow afternoon, I will participate in a roundtable session with the heads of UN agencies present in the country, to be moderated by the resident coordinator, which I eagerly anticipate. As I conclude, this visit is part of a broader effort to underscore the UN's dedication and commitment to ensuring a more prosperous and harmonious world that is inclusive of the Global South. I am confident that this trip will have served that purpose. My door is open to any nation or leader desiring to engage in further cooperation across borders, sectors, or UN departments. Together, we can deliver on peace, we can deliver on prosperity, we can deliver on progress, and we can deliver on sustainability. And I'm glad to have shared this message to both the government and people of Uganda, as well as all those present for these two summits. Thank you for your kind attention, and I now open the floor for your questions and or observations.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Can we have questions? Let's start with Arati, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Binga Aborova from RT, Russia Today. Now, Your Excellency, one of the major issues that was discussed at this 19th non-aligned summit was the ongoing Israeli aggression in Gaza. How is the United Nations actively addressing and seeking solutions to this conflict? And also conflicts with humanitarian implications around the world. And how does the organization plan to enhance its effectiveness, adaptability, and responsiveness to contemporary global issues? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have the second one.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Your name and the media house.
My name is Kanare Mugume from NBS TV Uganda. Particularly seeking for your response on conflict. Most of the times when the UN does respond on conflict, it does talk about Palestine or even Ukraine. There's so much conflicts happening in Africa, Central African Republic, Mozambique, Somalia, Burkina Faso and Mali, and many other countries, including the Sudan situation. What's your take on the conflicts happening in Africa, and what is NAM going to do to make sure that at least it takes a stand on some of these conflicts in Africa?
Thank you. And let's have a lady.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. My name is Rita Caroline Amanyire. from Nexus Media. African countries have been pushing for permanent seats on the UN Security Council. However, updated efforts have not been successful. So I'm inquiring how far with granting this, or should we be hopeful that this will be granted? Thank you.
Your Excellency, possibly you can answer those three, then we can take three more.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. I think the first question related to specifically to the situation in Gaza and about what the UN, how does the UN plan to adapt itself to be more impactful in resolving complex global issues. The first thing I want to say is that the UN is not the problem. The UN is not the problem. The UN seeks to be, sometimes to lead, but always to support the solution. So let's get that out of the way. Let's get that clear. The UN is not an actor in creating problems for the international system. The UN was set up as a problem solver to facilitate dialogue, discussion, compromise, agreement, understanding that leads to resolutions of conflicts. The situation in Gaza is an extremely frustrating one. I think you know why. 25,000 innocent civilian lives lost. It's a very impressive number for the wrong reasons. It's impressive because it is woefully and unacceptably large that so many innocent people who are not themselves combatants should be the victims of the military action taking place in Gaza. And that is why the General Assembly, which I have the honor to lead, and I am here, I'm sitting here, but I'm the voice and the face of the General Assembly. And that General Assembly was swift in agreeing a resolution that called for, number one, the immediate return of all hostages as a consequence of the unacceptable action that was taken by Hamas on October 7th, the cessation of the violence in Gaza in order to save lives. At the time we had made that call, I think the death toll was less than, it was about 7,000 people, the majority of whom were in fact women and children, young children, innocent children. And the third thing was to insist that the authorities, the Israeli authorities, permit and facilitate access of humanitarian aid to those in Gaza who needed it. So that was maybe, if one could use the descriptor, 6,000 or 7,000 lives ago. Today, it's in excess of 25,000 lives. That number has more than more than multiplied itself 4 times. And that's precisely the reason why the General Assembly delivered this very strong message that the violence must come to an end, because we saw the danger and the risk that many more innocent lives would be lost in a situation that threatened to become a spiral of death and destruction, which is precisely what has happened. As it stands at the moment, with no immediate end in sight to the hostilities in Gaza, it's anyone's guess what can and might happen next, including, of course, the worrisome prospect that this can all spill over into a regional war, a regional engagement, which of course would be the worst possible scenario that can happen. The other part of the question that was asked was how the UN plans to adapt itself in order to address more effectively global issues. But I think we need first, there's an answer to that question. But there is also, I think, the necessity of dissecting the origins of some of these conflicts and disputes. Conflicts and disputes create strife and tension in the system. The parties to those conflicts make a choice. They make a decision. There was a decision made to invade Ukraine. There was a decision made by Hamas, albeit not without provocation, of domination of Gaza for an extraordinary long period of time. But there was a decision made by Hamas on October 7th, and a consequential decision made by the State of Israel in response. Conflict and crisis and war are decisions. They're not necessarily inescapable decisions. There could have been other decisions. There could have been decisions for dialogue, for negotiation, in several rounds. That did not happen. The point I'm making is, war and peace are decisions that countries make for reasons best known to themselves. It is not the decision that the UN expounds and promotes for the very reasons we're seeing in Gaza. Because it's painful, it's dastardly, it's dehumanizing, it's destructive. Think for 1 minute of what it would cost. Let's for a moment, if we could, and in a sense we shouldn't, but if you for 1 minute just set aside the human cost of the war in terms of the lives, the 25,000 people. Think for 1 minute what it would cost to rebuild Ukraine, and what it might mean for the entire global economy and for global development in having to rebuild Ukraine and having to rebuild Gaza. Think for a moment. The United Nations Charter says we the people, in order to save future generations from the scourge of war. That is what the UN is about. Because we've been down this road before in the First and Second World Wars. There are no real winners. There are no winners. There are only losers, setbacks. Setbacks that undermine development, derail people's lives, impose costs and suffering on human beings. Create dysfunction in societies, impose new problems, new burdens on families. Can you imagine? 80% of the households in Gaza have been destroyed and are now uninhabitable. Where are these people to live? And under what protection from the environment, from the elements? So there's a logic to the UN position. Let's avoid this carnage because it's self-destructive. No one wins. We all lose. We all lose a part of our humanity watching other human beings suffer. It was never intended that way. What is the UN doing in order to empower itself to better address these challenges? The UN is not complacent or arrogant about its role and function and its capacity to meet the demands of the challenges that exist. In fact, the UN is very much a reformist organization. One of the issues, and it's a big issue, it's a huge issue, that has been dramatically demonstrated, particularly in relation to the war in Ukraine and to the war in Gaza, is the apparent incapacity of the United Nations Security Council, which has, under the Charter, primary responsibility for international peace and security. The incapacity of the Charter to act, to take the decisions that are necessary to be taken, that could politically alter the course of events. And the Security Council, because of deep divisions globally, geopolitical divisions, had not for a very long time been able to reach a decision, a consensus on Gaza. In the meantime, the death toll had been climbing. The UN itself, let us not forget, that UN personnel amounting to, I think, 155 souls have been lost in Gaza. And UN workers assigned to Gaza to provide humanitarian aid and support. Many of them were taking their children to work, their young children to work with them, out of fear that if they should die, their families would die with them. They did not want to be separated from their children because bombs were being dropped on UN facilities, contrary to the provisions and dictates of international law, contrary to the principles of international humanitarian law. Those are supposed to be safe spaces, as indeed are places like hospitals, health centers, schools. But the evidence seems to suggest that the nature of these facilities did not form part of the calculus in the bombing campaign that has taken place in Gaza. So you have the largest number of UN personnel killed in any military action anywhere in the world in the history of the UN. So Security Council reform is underway. I want to say to you, though, that Security Council reform is a process. It's not an event. I'm a very practical guy. And so I'd say to you, don't expect to get up to awaken Monday morning and find that the Security Council has been reformed. It will not happen in that way. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't because you have now a system that was invented in the post-1945 period when the world was a very different place. It needs to be updated, it needs to be refined, it needs to take into account the current geopolitical realities that exist. Power has shifted from where it was in the 1940s to what exists now. New countries have become influential players in the international system. And I will address the question of Africa later. So we need a Security Council that is reformed, that is up to the task, that is agile, and that is not paralyzed to take the decisions that need to be taken in the interest of securing international peace and security. That is an ongoing process. We have a process called the intergovernmental process with two facilitators, one from a developed country, one from a developing country, to engage in that discussion. There are a number of models or proposals on the table about how the Security Council can be reformed. And these models are being analyzed and discussed. There are as yet no formal negotiations to that end. That will come when member states have determined that the moment is right to commence formal negotiations. But Security Council reform is at the top of the agenda of the UN and has been made so to a significant degree because of what has happened in Ukraine and in Gaza. Quite apart from that, it's not just the reform of the Council. There is also a process to reinvigorate the General Assembly of the United Nations. And if you've been following the issue, you would know that in the wake of the paralysis of the Security Council, the General Assembly, which the Charter assigns a secondary role in matters of peace and security, has in fact taken up the gauntlet and been able to agree, I think now it's 4 resolutions on Gaza. Very decisive and clear resolutions on Gaza. So the UN is not the problem. We seek to address and correct the problems. The problems arise when member states of the United Nations, for whatever reason, and I have to say this correctly, exercise their decision to violate their commitments under the Charter of the United Nations. If there were no violations of the Charter, we would not be where we are now. It is a choice that countries make to repudiate their commitments under the Charter that has landed us in this very difficult situation of war and crisis and this unacceptably high human cost that we are witnessing in Gaza. The next question that was asked was about Africa, the conflicts in Africa, and NAM's position in the conflicts. Quite right. Quite right in the sense that the conflicts in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East, in a sense, has drowned out other regional conflicts, might be smaller, but that are no less important. And they're important for a number of reasons. They're important because they give rise to mass population movements. People are dislodged from their homes, from their homelands. I visited a refugee center today. People fleeing their homelands for a number of reasons and being given safe haven in Uganda in a program of acceptance that is unarguably one of the most progressive and impressive anywhere in the world. I'd like to take the opportunity to compliment and commend the government and people of Uganda for their very humanistic approach to refugees. There are some places in the world, if you look at the news, some very wealthy places where refugees are being turned back at the border, sent on to other countries, which is not something anticipated in the international refugee law and policy. But Uganda accepts the refugees, helps and supports them, and prepares them to go on to a country that will accept them. And I was very privileged today to observe and witness all of this and to see the processes and the facilities at which these procedures are carried out. It's very worrying, in fact, that Africa has again become, in the last 5-8 years, an area of conflict, a zone of conflict. We had thought that that era was behind us. We had thought that coups in Africa was behind us. That, however, is not the case. The UN is committed to supporting African governments and working with the regional authorities in Africa, such as the African Union and others, to address these conflicts. Because we are aware that these conflicts provide opportunities for opportunistic operatives to pounce on them, complicate them, with further implications for peace and stability across the region. If conflicts are not contained, they have a way of multiplying and spreading. And so our hope is that those countries in conflict in Africa will find the courage and the strength to come to the table and to discuss and resolve their differences, the UN is fully prepared to support that process, to bring the parties together, to facilitate that dialogue in a non-judgmental way. In a non-judgmental way. It is not for us in the UN to assign blame or responsibility. What we want is a solution that saves lives, creates stability, so that the business of pursuing development, bringing development to people who deserve it. Children can't go to school in the midst of a conflict. In some cases, you can't leave your home to purchase the things you need when guns are blazing over your heads. Conflict and crisis undermine the day-to-day lives of citizens, derails it. And that is why we are committed to doing what we can to support these countries in conflict, to resolve those conflicts in a sustainable way. In a sustainable way. The only way, and let me quote Mahatma Gandhi here. If you ever have the opportunity of visiting the UN, you should go into the UN gardens. There is a statue there of Mahatma Gandhi, the famous, world-famous leader of India, with one of his quotes. There is no way to peace. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. And that philosophy is as powerful today and will always be as powerful as it was when he uttered those words. Peace is the way. If we put people first, which is what the UN does, if we elevate the safety and security of human beings to the top of the agenda, we will see how worthless war and destruction is. So we need to put people first. Because all that we do, at the end of the day, development is not about how much money there is to spend. That is important. It's about spending the money in a way that lifts people up, gives them hope for tomorrow, prepares them, empowers them to live more fulfilling lives, to look after their children, to educate their children, to be upstanding citizens that make a contribution to their communities and societies and to global situation, to global peace and stability. And the last question that I was asked had to do with the African proposal for 2 seats in the Security Council. I have my own opinion about that, but I'm barred as President of this General Assembly from uttering what my opinion might be, because I represent only the views of the General Assembly. But what I can say is the process is ongoing. Everyone accepts that the Security Council as currently constituted is not fit for purpose. It has to be made fit for purpose. It has to be democratized. It has to reflect current realities of global power and global influence. And it must be agile and responsive to the dictates and demands of building peace and security in the early 21st century. So that some things have to change. When the Security Council was invented, 75 years ago. Many of the countries that now exist, many of the African states that now exist, did not at that time exist. They would have been under colonial domination. Thankfully, that era has passed. So we need to create a council that better represents the current reality, but more than that, better represents the aspirations of the people in the global south. I make no apologies for saying that, because the council has a particular structure, something called the P5, the permanent five, and of that five, only one might describe as coming from the global south, and that's China. And China is a unique case because, of course, China is a large country, very powerful, very influential. But there are no other countries from the global south. That clearly is not satisfactory in the early 21st century. So, don't be frustrated because there is no decision as of now regarding what would be the formula by which the Security Council will be constituted. That is a question that will come out in the negotiation. I've heard the African states negotiate. They're very adept at it. They've done their homework. Their capacity to reflect their needs and their interests is not in doubt. So let us allow the process time to mature before we begin to get frustrated. The matter is still on the table, and so Africa still has a chance to have 2 seats assigned to it in the Council. More questions?
We'll come to the end of this press briefing. The President has got other commitments, and they are waiting for him. So we apologize for that.
Can we have one more? Just one more, quickly.
Let's have the lady from.
Don't give me a 4-part question.
No, sir. Just a straightforward question.
Okay.
Good afternoon. The Kampala Declaration and pronunciation on the Israel-Palestinian war is expected to be delivered later today. How, in your view, should it look like to symbolize that the non-aligned movement is progressive in dealing with the current global challenges?
Come again? How in my view?
How, in your view, should the Kampala Declaration look like to symbolize that the non-aligned movement is progressive in dealing with the current global challenges?
Well, the first thing is that the non-aligned movement is a progressive movement and has been. The non-aligned movement has had a long history of repudiating war and conflict and promoting peace and stability, but also cooperation among states, particularly of the global south. So I'm sure that those fundamental, those foundational principles will find their way into the statement. Because situations of crisis complicate the existence of all countries. It adds cost. For example, the situation with the Houthis attacking international shipping. It sounds as if it's far away, but you will all have to stand the consequences of it. In terms of the price of imports, things that you buy from abroad that use those shipping lanes, the insurance cost to the buyers will go up. Those costs get passed on to the consumers. And so your budget will be affected. So war has a way, it snowballs and changes everything. And that is why it's not healthy. It's not something you do, as a matter of course. There are some wars that may be unavoidable. That's why, I don't know if you know, but there are things called legal wars. When the Security Council gives its assent, because all else has failed, and the situation is so desperate, to go to war. But that only exists in the most extraordinary of circumstances. War is not a policy of change. It cannot be in the normative sense. So let's promote and cultivate peace. Let us encourage dialogue and negotiation. And we must do so in our private lives as well as in our public lives. In your families, it's less stressful on you to make up or not to have to make up than to have to make up. Resolve it. It will save you time and effort and angst. The same way for the world. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but send me your questions at Ask the PGA. We have a link on the website of the President of the General Assembly, Ask the PGA, and we guarantee you an answer within 48 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll come to the end of this briefing.
Thank you very much.
I move.
As you witnessed there, that was a press conference by His Excellency Denis Francis, the 78th United Nations General Assembly President, and of course different media houses were present at this press conference. As we all know, United Nations is one of the largest, most inclusive, and we could say most democratic deliberative body on planet Earth. And we know as United Nations General Assembly, its role is to bring together nations in one common purpose, and of course to cogitate and then collaborate for one common goal. And the solutions are mostly revolved around the most pressing issues like the conflicts, as we all witnessed. No wonder they share the same values with a non-aligned movement, and that's why they are here in the country. The most important objective for NAM and probably a sister formation United Nations is mostly peace and security. As we witnessed in that press conference, His Excellency Denis Francis took us through the several visits that he had while in Kampala. He talked about the beautiful city of Kampala, and he talked about the tour, the tour he made to visit some of the United Nations programs, or the programs that have been sponsored by United Nations, like at Makerere University. He talked about Nachivubo Blue, and of course some of the other programs that are carried on by the United Nations agencies. And later on, he said he will have a meeting with the agencies to discuss more on deliberative moments on how the UN programs should be carried on. The press conference revolved around questions to do with humanitarian complications and of course the Gaza conflict, and then there was also another question about major conflicts that are right now rampant in Africa. And the very first thing that he made in the comment was that the United Nations is not the problem here. when we talk about war-torn zones, it is not the problem. He pressed that they have deep concerns about the calamity that is happening in Gaza Strip, and he emphasized that the formation of United Nations way back was about resolving conflicts, resolving issues. So they are not the problem causers. Their goal is to resolve conflicts in these war-torn areas, and they are deeply concerned about the many lives that have been lost in Gaza, the mothers, the children, and the most stressful issue is that these people are not armed. These are innocent lives that have fallen victim into this war crisis. The UN as well, he talked about, it seeks in part of its resolutions and declaration into these war-torn zones is that specifically in Gaza, they seek immediate return of all hostages. He talked about also one of the ceasefire resolution that was also carried on with one of the documents that were presented yesterday. It is immediate conflict, immediate ceasefire of the conflict that's happening in Gaza Strip. And of course, the worry here, the most worry here is that this calamity in Gaza Strip can easily spill over into the region and cause more destruction. Yes, we do agree with that. Now, the conflicts and disputes, as we all know, whether it's Africa or Europe or any other war-torn zone, we all know that disputes create strife. And he said that the parties that cause these conflicts do have a decision to make. Yes, he said that they can choose to do good, they can choose to do good, or they can choose to do bad. And on October 7th, Hamas had a decision to make, whether to go to war or to save lives, because we all know that in war-torn zones, there's nothing, there's nothing that comes out of it. It's just destructive, and nothing can build the country. And he talked about how long it takes to build a nation and how easy it is to destruct the nation. He talked about, as he was winding up, that the Security Council reform is underway, but he said it's not a microwave process. It is going to be a process because it needs issues like monitoring and then updates, so it won't happen overnight, but that's one of the plans that United Nations has. And he talked about the Security Council. If they have it, it doesn't have to be paralyzed. It should be something that is continual. They can always change. They can always amend, just to suit what's happening. Then the last question was, it was also still about what conflicts cause. And that is something to do with if conflicts happen in a country, there's usually mass movement. And he thanked Uganda for the humanitarian efforts that they put in welcoming the refugees. And they don't just, we as Ugandans, we don't just welcome the refugees, or the government doesn't just welcome the refugees, but they help them into rehabilitation. So he thanked them in that area. And of course, he said that as a government, as organizations that advocate for security and peace, there is need to put people first. To care for their livelihood, to care for their rights, and then also security. And he said, as United Nations, he is tight. He can only represent the views of the United Nations General Assembly. And he said, as Ugandans, let us promote peace. We must do this. We must activate and practice peace in our homes, in the societies where we live, and also in the government in the country. Well, that was His Excellency, the 78th United Nations General Assembly President, His Excellency Denis Francis. Now, as we move ahead, President Museveni has made Mr. Ling Zonghong the special representative of President of China, His Excellency Xi Jinping. Mr. Guangzhong, who is also the member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China Central Committee and the Vice Premier of the State Council, is representing His Excellency Jinping at the 19th Non-Aligned Movement, and now there is NAM and the G77 Plus China Summit. Now, in a sideline meeting during the NAM Summit, at Speak Resort, Munyonyo, President Museveni expressed profound gratitude to China for its unwavering support during the anti-colonial struggle and highlighted its crucial role in bolstering Africa's economic development since its early days of independence.
Ever since 1949, when the Communist Party took power in China, China has been on the side of Africa. Since China has grown economically, it has helped Africa even more, including Uganda. We don't agree with the shallow, what I said in my speech is what we have studied very carefully. You don't have to have the whole world thinking the same way. What is important is to have the minimum common interests and then deal with those, and then you leave the other issues to each society. So we are very happy with China. China's contribution in the anti-colonial struggle, in the economic cooperations area, China is acting correctly. What we want to emphasize now is market access, because this is the best way to help one another and help one another sustainably. Because if you buy what I produce, you are supporting my prosperity. So China to open their market to African products is a very easy way of how to help one another and for mutual benefit. So China should take the lead to buy from Africa, but also to buy not raw materials, to buy also finished products, so that we have balanced and value-added trade, in balanced trade in value-added items. You are most welcome. We are going to be together tomorrow on the G77. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that was the meeting with our very own President Yoweri Museveni. Now, as we know, NAM Summit will soon be ending at any time. And of course, some of heads of states and high-level officials are set off to depart back to their homes. Our team is already at standby, as you can see. Yes, Robert Nyango is already at the airport. And yes, Robert Nyango, can you briefly tell us how is it happening there? How are the departures?
Well, hello Uganda and our viewers of UBC TV. Yes, we are rightly coming to you live from Entebbe International Airport. This is the 60th day of our operation ever since we touched Entebbe International Airport last Saturday, 14th January 2024. Today, 16th January 2024, it is business as we have been promising. And this is the updates we are bringing to you, the entire country, Uganda, and probably the world watching us from wherever it is. The last night of Friday, that is on 19th January 2024, we witnessed the arrival of the UN Secretary General, and that was at around 11 in the night. His Excellency Antonio Guterres, who arrived here, he was received by the Uganda's permanent representative to UN, His Excellency Adonia Ayebare, and the third Deputy Prime Minister, Rukia Isanga Nakadama. Also, in the morning of Saturday, that is 20th January 2024, we received a big delegation from Iran, and that was led by the Vice President of Iran. However, in the morning of Saturday, 20th January 2024, here at Entebbe International Airport, we have continued to witness the departures of heads of government and states who are probably leaving Uganda for other business, or we are told that most of these heads of state and government are probably heading to DRC, where there is a swearing-in ceremony of His Excellency Felix Tshisekedi. Among those who have departed Uganda this morning is the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. The President of Burundi has also departed Uganda, probably to DRC.